I'm Chris.
I'm Steve.
And we're talking about some deep shit. And we're back to talk about some more deep shit. How's it going, Steve?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, Chris?
Not too bad. I thank you out there for joining us. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back.
Thank you again for listening.
Yeah. So we have said that we're going to talk about a wide variety of subjects, but so far we've talked a lot about UFOs, and we're going to do that again today.
Here we are again with more news and more things to talk about because, in my opinion, it just keeps heating up.
We have to handle UFOs because it's been a very busy season for things going on in the UFO world. So, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about.
Here we are.
Yeah. So, the first major thing, right, we're going to talk about this is the House passing their National Defense Authorization Act, which has some UFO provisions in it, which is very exciting.
And some very interesting provisions.
Very groundbreaking provisions, actually.
That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah, I guess so. So this National Defense Authorization Act, so Congress passes this every year, and that's what gives the Pentagon the money to do whatever they do the following year. So last year, when this Authorization Act went through, that established a UFO office in the Pentagon. And so that's what got that one going. This one is going to open up the gates for people to be able to come forward and talk about things they've worked on, even if they're under security oaths not to talk about them. So
all right. You went right to the groundbreaking parts. This, just like most laws, bills, acts, whatever you want to call it, whatever written document you're looking at, it's full of bureaucracy.
Yes.
Right? But there's some meat to this provision that I think you want to talk about, and it covers a few different things that piqued my interest. The provision called for an office to be put together, right? And they put together the Airborne Object Identification and Management Group that they somehow turned into calling it AMSOG.
AMSOG.
I don't know how they got that, but they did. That's what they called it. And during those hearings, I don't remember if it was Bray or Moultrie, they basically said, we're going to rename this, right?
Right. So I think what happened was the Pentagon, they did that office right before the act passed, which I think caused some consternation out there in the UFO community because they were going to be established. Here, you have to open up this office. You have to do these things. They quickly go, well, we have a group. We already opened it. Here it is. And it wasn't quite what Congress was looking for, but they let it slide, and then it seemed like nothing was going on. So they started putting pressure on the Pentagon, members of Congress, to get moving on this. And I think what's happened is a lot of Congress people have said that they've had these briefings where their worldview has been shook. That alone should make us all go, I want to hear what they're hearing.
And with this provision, if it passes the Senate, we might just be able to.
Yes, the Senate's going to do its own thing to sort of tweak it. So I guess that's the way it works, like with most bills, right? The House has their version, they vote on it. Then it has to go to the Senate, and they'll tweak it, and then they'll vote on it. And then once it goes through, then it hits the president's desk. The president signs it, and then it goes into law. I know Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand are the two senators that are like spearheading this. So this one was the House, though. So the House voted on this, and it was Gallagher, and he was the congressperson who was asking all those great questions. I thought they were great questions during the hearing.
Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin.
Yeah, he really got into the UFO thing. I think he got some people talking to him and saying, "Hey, here's the information you need to look at." So when he went into that hearing, he had some fairly targeted questions about activity at military bases, nuclear bases specifically.
Right. Before they renamed it, right? Do you want to talk about what the renaming is?
Well, the renaming came more recently.
Right. It's very recent.
Like in the last day or two, right?
What are they calling it now? All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. or Aru, I guess is the
I think Arrow is going
Arrow.
to end up what they're going to show
all
it
right.
to, because that was actually suggested at one point by somebody that it be Arrow, and
Your
then-
mind is just much clearer than mine, I guess, on this, because I was just pronouncing it out.
These acronyms, there's no really right way to do it. It's all in the in how you what letters you tend to
Right. And the first part of this provision caught me right away, Chris, because they were originally going to be focusing on airborne as well as space threats. That's what they called it, right? The renamed office is going to be looking at those things as well as what they call transmedium, which when I first read it, it's not a term I'm very familiar with. So I said, what is this, right? But I guess that's a craft or a vessel or whatever you want to call it that can go through the air, the space, and water.
Right, without losing any of its effectiveness, which is something that we don't have any vehicles that can do that. We
Right.
have vehicles that are built for certain environments.
Right.
They're built for space. They're built for water. They're built for air. You can't go to the other one because it's a different design.
And I guess the ones that can, because there are some cars that can go into the water, right? They can't go under the water. But the vessel that can go in the water and in the land, it's kind of okay on the land and it's just kind of okay on the water. I think they're talking about things that can fly into the water and then just jet right back out again.
Right. Anytime we make something that has to go operate in two different mediums, there's a design compromise. You have to make some adjustments to make it do well in both. Like a seaplane. That's the example I've heard
Right.
a lot, right? It's a plane and it floats. It's not that great of a plane and it's not that great of a boat, but it does do both. These craft that they're talking about, what is causing confusion is they seem to be able to go from space to atmosphere into the water and lose nothing, be able to just cut through like it's not even there. And there was a question at the hearing that came up, this past months ago when was that May?
Yes.
And they specifically asked about craft being spotted underwater. And that was one of the questions where the two Pentagon officials said, well, we better hold that for the closed door briefing that's going to happen right after this. So they didn't want to talk about that in the open session. And that's caused. So now they're taking it all and they're saying it's not just things in the air. It's not just things in space.
Well, here's
Could be
something
anywhere.
to think about, right? I was assuming when I was looking at the documents, I was researching. Okay. Originally, they're looking at what they call potential threats to air and space. So they changed. We'll talk about how they changed a little bit because they did other changes as well. Why pick this, right? You could say it's because of the questions that were asked at the hearing, and that's maybe some of the other issues with the different the provision we have, the new provision. But why pick this, right? I look at it this way, Chris. There's probably a good amount of people, maybe some of the people listening to this podcast, that say to themselves, this is all just a show and pony. This is a pony show. These UFOs aren't real. None of these threats are real. They're just doing this to appease people, right? Well, if they're just appeasing people, why are they adding extra things to look into? That doesn't itself makes no sense.
No, the other thing I've heard people say is that this is all just a sham to get more money for the Pentagon. I don't know if you've been paying attention. They don't really have to do much to get more money. They just have to ask for it. All they have to say is there's a terrorist threat, or they can say anything, and basically Congress is going to write them a check with lots of zeros. So they don't need to fake this to get more funding. It seems to be causing them more problems than it's giving them advantages. You'd have to question why anyone would come up with this plan to, try to pull one over on everybody? I mean, is that what we're saying is happening? Is that our government is trying to pull one over on the entire planet and make the entire planet, because it's not just our government that's seeing these things. Other governments are seeing them opening up. Brazil just had some hearings themselves. Other countries are getting into the act.
Right.
So are we really saying that this is all just a sham and our government is doing this huge show for what?
Right.
Like, what would be the motivation? There's no motivation there to do this.
Well, the only motivation to me is there's something that they want to look into to try to get to the bottom of.
Right. And they don't all want to get to the bottom of it because there are elements in the Pentagon, there are elements in various forces, the Air Force for one. There are some people who they don't want this can of worms opened, and they've been trying very hard to shove it back in, and it's catching momentum now. I think we're past the point where we can shut this stuff down.
We'll get to the rest of the provision, as I think we want to talk about this kind of in detail. But this provision, if it works, will cut into those people that don't want anybody to talk about it, because that's exactly what's going to be happening if this provision goes through. I just want to say, if you hear me drinking anything during the podcast, I'm enjoying a West Coastin' Double IPA from Smutty Nose, which is up here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Thank you.
Oh, if they'd like to sponsor the podcast, they can certainly do that as well.
Be my guest.
I'm drinking a nice cold Coors Light because that's my watery beer of choice.
That's all right. Interesting. We were talking about why pick transmedium as an addition to what they're looking into. Well, I guess that says that the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022 required that they establish an office where responsibility is broader than originally assigned, right? But it didn't say you have to pick this certain thing. They chose it.
I think they're trying to get a big umbrella because by subdividing it, things in air, things in space, things in underwater, if you keep them separate, it's very easy to not get all the information in one place, because there have been some cases where they've actually tracked objects seemingly coming in from outside of the atmosphere, through the atmosphere, into the water. And so if you don't have one body investigating it all, they're only going to see pieces of that, and you're not going to see the whole picture of this. Is a weird, I don't think our minds have yet wrapped around how weird this is getting. I think a lot of people are still in that mode where they're thinking this is just purely nuts and bolts craft coming from somewhere. I don't know that it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like a part of it.
What are you trying to say?
As you get into some of this stuff, it gets weird. At first, you can look into UFOs and you're strictly in objects, craft, science. You're in that very firm territory. But very quickly, you skirt over to the weird stuff, whether you want to talk about the cattle mutilations or the abductions. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that go along with UFOs that are just sort of tangentially in the spectrum, but they get so weird that people don't want to even look at that because it feels like it takes the credibility away. You get this a lot of people who research UFOs, but they don't want to look anything into supposed abductions because, well, that's too weird. That can't be happening. Or cattle mutilations or crop circles. Like, there are all those things that I don't quite know how I feel about any of them yet, but I kind of get a feeling there's something there, whatever that thing is. So that's what I'm saying is this UFO thing, as more is uncovered, people supposedly who know are saying things like, this changes everything. Not just, hey, we're not alone here. It changes everything about our understanding about how everything works. And I don't know. I don't know what to believe. Obviously, I don't have any of this information, so I can't say. But it's just interesting that you have our government really keeping this in the realm of these are something to be investigated. We're going to figure out what it is. Then you have other people saying you're never going to figure this out because we're not to the point where we can even approach some of these ideas and understand them and wrap our heads around them. So I don't know.
Well, you're talking about a lot of different things, and I find all of them fascinating. And I do believe that they are all interconnected. Some probably stronger than others, but I do believe they're all interconnected. And that is why, to me, it's so interesting if this passes. I know there's some exceptions to it that we could talk about, but if it passes, it's going to make one hell of a congressional hearing.
My understanding is that more hearings are going to happen soon. I've heard various people say that they're just waiting for the January 6th stuff to wrap up because they can't
Right.
have too many things running at once. So my understanding is that once those hearings are done and in the rearview mirror, that you will see new congressional hearings, probably on the Senate side, much like we saw, earlier in the summer in the House, and that's coming, and that they're already talking about bringing some people in. I think the big blockage has been certain people out there in government know things, but because they're classified under certain programs, they can't talk about them to anyone. So it's hard to gather information on this stuff.
Right.
So I think what Congress is trying to do is trying to open up that conduit and say, no, here is a path where you can talk to someone. And there's a mechanism for you to report. It doesn't matter if you're under, NDAs or what, government protection where you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. You can talk about it through this specific channel. And I think that is huge. The part of this that the wording of it is very interesting. So what they say in it is, I love this part. For a period beginning on January 1st, 1947, so they're going back to 47, and ending on the date on which the Comptroller General completes activities under this subsection, compile and itemize a complete historical record of the intelligence community's involvement with an unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena, including successful or unsuccessful efforts to identify and track unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena, and efforts to recover or transfer related technologies to United States-based industry or national laboratories. So they're giving a way to say, you can talk about if you've been involved in anything to do with these objects, even if what you're involved with is, not supposed to be, you're not supposed to talk about it. You can come to us and tell. They want to hear everything. To go back to 1947?
Right. I mean, yes, it covers everything. When you were talking about weirdness, right? That came to my mind as I was researching for this, because I said to myself, all right, you could broaden the spectrum, and I know they chose the transmedium craft, or whatever you want to call it, right? For a reason. There's been sightings, there's been reports, and then there were questions at the hearing. Right? But they could have chosen other things too, right? Like they could have chosen, I said to myself, as I was researching before I came upon it, I said, well, why didn't they look into these reports of sightings above military facilities and that were shutting down nuclear facilities? And then I said, wait a minute, it is covering this too.
It's covering it's so broad, it's going to get everything. That's what they're really shooting for, is to get every source of information that they can. Because there's a lot of parts of the government that don't talk about this. I'll go back to saying this again. The Air Force is completely absent in any of these conversations. You're hearing a lot about the Navy. The Air Force, historically, have been the ones involved in all those, the lore of when you get UFOs. You get like Roswell and the different crashes that supposedly happened. In all those reports, everything, it was always Air Force being involved. Now Air Force has just gone silent. But they're also Space Force,
right,
which is a part of the Air Force. So wouldn't they be in the best position to know the first link in that chain is something coming in from out of the, outer atmosphere.
Maybe they've been unable to discuss it, and maybe that's something that's going to come up now.
That's the thing, right?
What does it say? Officially stated, this new arrow, as you said, which is probably the right way of saying it. Leave it to me to do something wrong on the pronunciation. It says they will also be tasked with synchronizing efforts across the Department of Defense and with other U.S. federal departments and agencies to detect and identify objects at or near locations pertinent to national security, such as training areas and military installations. I mean, if people don't think that's something serious, this is basically the entire United States government can work together for detecting objects that are near training and military installations. To me, that's a pretty serious thing.
Yeah, it should be taken a lot more seriously than it is. So it's I love this.
Now, do you think that they added the provision for these facilities, which will encompass nuclear facilities, because of what Mike Gallagher asked Moultrie and Bray about the was that Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967? He asked them specifically about that during the hearings. I just wonder, is that added because of that? Is it added because they already knew something before he ever asked that question?
Well, that whole question was odd because the very report that happened came through the released documents through the Pentagon, like through the Freedom of Information Act. That's why we know that happened.
But they knew it. They knew it.
Did they know it, or did they know enough not to know about it so they didn't have to talk about it? I mean, that's the question, right? That's how you insulate yourself from things like that. Is you don't know about it. You know it exists, but you don't know about it, because then if someone asks you if you know about it, you can say, "Well, I don't know about it." But it's a tricky way to get around it. You just, I don't know it.
So this guy I was reading in that Politico article, May 18th, 2022, by Brian Bender. He spoke to a person named Robert Salas. He's kind of a guy that's been interviewed in the past.
Mm-hmm.
He was there, right, in that Air Force Base Malmstrom, and he basically says, please call me, and I would love to talk about this if I can.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who were asking to say, bring me up and let me talk to Congress, and I'll tell them what I know. Why they started out with those two Pentagon officials, Ronald Moultrie and what was the Bray's first name? I don't remember his name.
Charles?
Maybe. But those two, they didn't have as much really. They didn't have firsthand knowledge. All their knowledge would have been, they're higher up the chain, so they can just talk about what has come up, what they know about. Whereas you can bring people up who were on hand for some of these events and can speak to it, like first-hand account of what happened, and that's coming because they're going to have to go there. We can't keep, trotting up Pentagon officials who don't have many answers. I almost feel like they did that to see if the public would lose interest.
Well, I mean, that's one way of looking at it, right? Another way of looking at it, there's probably 1,000 ways of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, as an attorney, I don't want to talk about me being an attorney all the time, but as an attorney, sometimes you ask questions or you get testimony on the record, not so much because you really want that testimony on the record, but you just want to hold people to what their answers were because you know what you're going to ask someone else.
Right.
And it's just this building block, right? So optimistically, that's how I'm looking at it. You could look at pessimistically and just say, well, they don't care. They're just doing this just to pacify people and do what you want. But if you optimistically, I'm looking at it saying, maybe this is, because these people are asking questions. These aren't stupid people. These are smart people. And a lot of them are attorneys. I'm not saying you have to be an attorney, or smart to be an attorney. I'm just saying they're trained to how to ask questions. So they could be just building this whole case one by one, and they have put together who to ask questions first.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually do think that was part of what they were doing. In the hearing, I thought a lot of their initial questions were good. They just didn't do a great job of following up. They would ask a question and they would get an unsatisfactory answer, and they would just kind of let that stand. But I actually, going with your thought process, and I think we may have talked about this at the time. Yeah, they're just setting it up to say you're on the record saying, what are they on the record now saying? That they didn't know anything about any incursions at nuclear facilities. They said they weren't aware of that. They also were asked point blank if they've ever tried to communicate with one of these objects, and they said they hadn't. They were also asked, have they ever fired on one of these objects, and they said that they haven't. I find those very hard to believe. Are you telling me that an object that you couldn't identify was over a sensitive military installation, and they didn't try to communicate with it, and they didn't try to shoot it down? Like, it doesn't seem like... What did they do then?
Right. I mean, my question would be, all right, I thought you were supposed to be protecting us.
Yeah. And I've heard, there's a documentary filmmaker, Jeremy Corbell, who does a lot of work on UFOs. And he, shortly after, he came out and he said he's talked to personnel on different military craft and so forth that say we have, in fact, fired on these objects, like directly refuting what Moultrie and Bray said in the hearing. So
what do they say happened after they fired?
A lot of these people won't go on the record, so he doesn't say the whole. He just says that there are people who've told him that fire has been exchanged.
Okay,
and
exchanged.
I mean, I don't know if that means they fired back or if nothing came of it that we know of. Okay. I don't know. Again, you're getting all these, until we can get some of these people on the record in front of Congress, it's just stories. Could it be true? Sure. Could it be a bunch of shit? Yes, it could. It could be completely made up. I don't know. I wasn't there. So we need people to get in front of Congress and actually say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, none but the truth, or whatever they say, and spill it.
Right.
And then we can go from there. And there has to be, these things have to be televised, and there has to be, I don't know. I don't like the idea of a closed door hearing after. Like, that doesn't,
right.
To me, that just, it strikes me as, okay, so we can have part of the info. I understand there's certain things that we can't talk about. A big part of this, I guess, is that some of the information obtained is obtained through sensor systems that they can't talk about, because then we'd let our enemies know what sensors we have where and what they're capable of. So that's the excuse for not giving a lot of this information out to the public is, well, we can't disclose what we know without disclosing how we know it, and disclosing how we know it will tell our enemies what we're able to do. So that's
and it is understandable, right? And also, there have been reports that they've learned about some of this activity through eavesdropping, spying, I guess you'd say, on the communications that other countries are having.
Right.
So, I mean, I can see, if you're going to just look at this without a pessimistic mind, without a mind thinking there's something up at every turn, you could say to yourself, well, if they are in fact spying on Russia, let's say, which they probably are, right? Mm-hmm. And listening to this Russian exchange between whoever military personnel, they're understanding, wow, there is something going on there. They're not going to say, well, we found out because, we're listening to everything they're doing, and this is how we're doing it.
Right.
They're never going to. I get that.
I get that as well. I do. I understand that part of it. So then that makes it more important for us to gather information that's not restrained by these methods, like the Galileo project. That's something that's being done by Harvard professor Avi Loeb, and they're actually building their own sensors and they'll detect the sky themselves. As he says, like, the sky's not classified. We can point sensors up there, and if we pick anything up, we can tell anybody we want.
Where's that thing now that he said was from another alien or something? That it looks like a rock, but it's kind of spinning.
It left our solar system. It
gone now.
came. Yeah, it came through. It zoomed through. It actually it picked up speed. There's a lot of weirdness about that. And this is the head of whatever the astronomy or whatever at Harvard. I mean, this is not Avi Loeb is not like just some yokel in the back.
He's not a lightweight.
No,
at all.
No, he's taking a lot of heat for his advocacy and his advocacy is only that, hey, we shouldn't say it's impossible. We should weigh the evidence and look at it with a scientific mind and see if there's anything to it.
Right.
And if there's not, we can say, no, we looked into it. It's this tendency that some people have that it's like, that is not legitimate, therefore we should not even look into it. It's a weird position to take.
It is. I mean, some people say, "Oh, you're wasting money. You're on a fool's errand," and I get it. I understand that line of thinking. What I don't understand is taking a position that we somehow know everything when it comes to any subject you could possibly think of. We learn new things every day. It's the height of arrogance to continue to think we know everything.
Right, we do this every time. We
right?
talked about
we
this.
talk
last
about
episode,
it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this story that's out regarding the allowing testimony or revealing information, to me, Chris, this, especially if it actually happens, but just right now at least, it's one of the biggest stories, in my opinion, in this realm of discussion in the last, I don't know, I can't remember a bigger story than saying, listen, we're basically, all right, the House, they voted to create a secure government system for reporting UFOs and to compel current and former officials to reveal what they might know without fear of reprisal.
Right.
It's aimed at current, like you said, and former, going back to 1947, military personnel, government civilians, and contractors. That's everyone that's ever worked for the government since 1947. Who isn't it?
There's an important point there too, including government contractors.
Yes.
See, that's been the method, I think, of keeping this stuff secret, is that if it's in government, there's a paper trail. There's Freedom of Information Act. There's classification guidelines. Like, you can't keep certain things, in theory, secret in government without a compelling reason. But what you can do is you can shoot it off to private aerospace who are immune to FOIA requests or whatever. And so that is what a lot of people who study this say that's been happening, is that over the years, the real juicy stuff gets shunted off to private aerospace because then it can't be gotten to. Nobody can, request a document because that's all private stuff.
This is everybody.
Right. And so now you're going to have the ability of someone saying, hey, I witnessed this thing. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I can talk about it to you guys because you're part of the channel. And private aerospace company X came and picked it up and took it away, and that's the last I know of it. And then they can follow that trail.
Right. What does the public do, Chris, if, let's just say they have a hearing in 6 months, and you have 25 people telling stories, reports, such as, let's say, you just talked about. How does it not change the perspective of how we are viewing this topic? It has to.
Right. And that's saying nothing of the deeper stuff, which I alluded to earlier about how weird this stuff gets.
Yes.
Even if just on its surface level. Let's say that this is simply, I say simply, but it's not, simply somebody coming from another place to visit here. That alone would shatter our worldview of everything that we think is how things work. If it gets weirder than that, like, it's not that they're traveling distance, it's that they're traveling frequency. I mean, these are the kind of things that are being openly discussed out there, is that it's not that they are coming from a distant place. It's almost like parallel dimensions. Again, it gets really the kind of stuff where people are like, that's made up, that's sci-fi. Well, it is, but it came from somewhere.
What I was thinking when you were talking about how would the public react, I think, Chris, if the hearing, let's say the hearings happen and people can speak. And now it doesn't really say that they can speak publicly at a hearing, or it has to be a closed door hearing. I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Well, actually, let's stop for a second, because that is an interesting part to think about. The only reason things can be classified, my understanding, is to protect methods and to protect sources. Those are the only two reasons why things can get classified. So the excuse that they've used up till now that I've heard is that a lot of the data that they have on these things were gained by methods that they can't talk about because you're giving up either sources or you're giving up methods. If you're talking about somebody coming in and testifying to what they saw, there should be nothing in that couldn't be talked about in an open hearing. Because there's nothing in there that talks about methods or sources.
Unless it's something to do with a method or source as to how they saw it.
But if they were just present for it, is what I'm saying. So if you have a service person and they would say, I was at this site or whatever it is, theoretically there should be, if my understanding of this is correct, and I think it is that I can't see how they can hide this. It seems like they will.
Well,
they can, I guess.
I hope you're right. So what I was saying is, let's just say they can publicly talk about this. And let's just say, at first blush, that's how it's viewed. And maybe that's how it really is. Who knows? I don't know. I'm interested in obtaining the information, right? Let's just say they talk about how it's a craft. You're talking about maybe different things, right? Which I don't disagree with. It could be that too. But I think if you got the public on board that it might be a craft from somewhere else, they'll go down that hole with you, and they'll go to the other things too, because their minds have been blown. Okay, so after that, if they said, "Oh, it's also this thing with a parallel universe," people will be like, "Oh, really? How did that work?" I think that this is the huge hump. If in fact these people are convincing with their testimony, if this actually occurs, I just think that you would have already won over a lot of people, and then they'll follow you to the next step.
Right. So I see what you're saying. So the believability that it's happening is the big hump. And once you get people over that and to accept that, then it's a matter of, okay, it gets a little bit weirder. Oh, it gets a little bit weirder. Those weirdness is incremental as opposed to that first bit.
Yeah, I'm already on board with the weirdness. All right, you're taking it to second level weirdness. Okay, I'm with you.
Right. Yeah. It will be interesting to see. I mean, I'm still astounded at how little this has made waves, even with what we know now. I mean,
although I'll tell you, Chris, it seems like more and more things happen, and there's big stories, especially in the last year or so, and it seems like nobody cares about most things.
Is it going to hit a tipping point, though? At some point, will just the preponderance of evidence just be so overwhelming that you cannot ignore it anymore? I mean, where are we at now? We are at, the government has said, hey, these things are real. We're not sure what they are. They've established an office. They've established new protocols. They've established entire infrastructures to get to the bottom of this. NASA is now investigating. That was another piece of information that came out in the last few weeks. They're starting their own UFO investigation. So you have a lot of different elements starting to take it seriously. I'm seeing more articles and news items where it's not ridiculed. It's not jokey. It's presented rather seriously. I'm seeing more of those now than I've ever seen before. From legitimate sources. Like,
if 20 years ago, right? If you said if we had this discussion 20 years ago, most people would say, what are you guys? You guys are nuts. What are you guys talking about, right? Today, a lot of people, I don't know if I want to say majority because my sampling is not, indicative of the whole country, of the whole world, I guess. But a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of things I talk to online, most people say we're foolish to think we're the only people. Whereas a generation ago, that's not what people thought.
No.
But slowly but surely people are accepting. And I think that it takes something big to then jump to the next level of acceptance.
Well, people said that because we were generally told by quote-unquote important scientists that the likelihood of life existing elsewhere was very, very small. I mean, that was the line that we heard for years and years and years. Oh, life on this planet's an anomaly, can't possibly exist elsewhere. And then at some point in the last bunch of years, they came out and just kind of quietly said, oh, yeah, actually, we calculated that wrong. Actually, the number of planets that could hold life is actually limitless.
Yeah, we can't count it.
Right. And you're right. People's perception on that has changed. People will continue to listen to voices of authority on different things, no matter how many times those same voices of authority steer us wrong.
Right.
We just go back to them like, well, you were wrong that time, but this time I'm sure you're right. And I don't know. Maybe. I mean, the tide is turning. I know you're going to see that movie Nope this weekend. Right?
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah.
I'm actually looking forward to seeing that. I'm going to see that.
I like his movies.
The fact that a major film that is hypothesizing alien intervention of some sort, it's going to be kind of a trip to see how, if this is, softens people up for the idea of it. If people come out of, this movie does well, and then people come out with more of an interest, because I bet you that people go see this movie who don't even know anything's going. I find that hard to believe, but it is true.
No, a lot of people see the movie just because of the director.
But I'm saying that they don't know there's anything going on with UFOs right now.
Oh, right.
Like there are a sizable amount of people.
They really should be listening to us.
Who, they really should. I have no idea that anything's going on. But you're right. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I did talk about stuff like this, but there was no backup. I mean, this was one of those topics that if you were willing to do the research, you had all sorts of interesting stories. Couldn't corroborate any of them.
It was much more difficult to do the research.
True.
Right?
Yeah. Right. And even what little information you had no way really, and you always had the specter of the government saying, it's all crap.
Right.
Don't pay attention to it. We looked into it. Trust us. We looked into it. It's crap.
Right.
And so a lot of people were just like, yeah, see, it's crap.
Right.
So you couldn't get anywhere. And it's funny how we always would say, skeptics would say, well, we're the credible people with reports. And then you'd present a credible person to them. As soon as you presented that credible person, they're making a UFO report, they're not credible. So it was kind of like a chicken and egg thing where you couldn't get any information on it because you wanted an unimpeachable source. But by its very, presenting of whatever information, the source was now suspect. So it's you get that same, the skeptics. I don't know. I feel like the skeptics now are kind of losing some momentum because I think you could. I don't know.
Well, because most people believe that there's something, right? They might not believe that anybody's coming to this planet, but they kind of think that there is something out there. I think a lot of people do. When you said voices of authority, when I was researching this subject we were talking about, I was looking at some of the things Mike Gallagher said, the guy from Wisconsin, the congressman.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like the guy. I like his questions. I don't really know the guy at all, but I like his questions. I like his veracity. I like the way he's approaching this situation. But there was one thing he said, at least to Politico, that I didn't like.
What was that?
All right, I'm going to quote him. He stated that the primary interest is to ensure that our military and intelligence community are armed with the best possible information, I like that, capital and scientific resources, sounds good, to defeat our enemies and maintain military and technology superiority. Now, is he talking about other countries or is he talking about UAPs? Because if he's talking about UAPs, I mean, what is this? Is he talking about a pound of flesh? What do they do to us? I'm not that keen on calling them our enemy. If that's, I don't know who he's talking about.
I think that language is intentional. I think.
How so?
I think as long as you phrase this as if it could be our adversaries, as if it could be understandable technology, you make some people more comfortable with engaging in it. But going down that road, if it's something else, it's going to uncover that as well. So, I mean, I think they're being fairly brazen in the language of the, of the Defense Act and all, that Authorization Act. Like, they're being pretty brazen, but it's still couched within there is something flying around in our air and in our space and under our seas that we can't identify. We're going into this assuming that it's technology that someone possesses, maybe one of our adversaries. We need to uncover it. So I think couching it in that makes it easier to swallow, because how would it be received if the language was let's just say pretty pro alien? These alien craft coming in from another star system. Like, if language like that would dilute it, and then somebody would look at it and go, that's ridiculous, why are we putting money into this? So keeping it in that national defense realm is just smart, because you cannot argue with that. If something's flying through our restricted airspace or our restricted sea space or whatnot, we need to know what it is. How do you argue with that? What do you come back with this? Well, no, we should just let those things do whatever. Well, really? What if they're Russian? What if they're Chinese?
Yeah.
So keep it there, because then you cannot shut it down. And then if the truth comes out of what it is, I find it very unlikely that it would be the Russians or the Chinese.
Well, here's how my view, whatever that's worth. If a enemy of ours, Russia, is China an enemy? I don't know, right? But let's just say whoever. Russia and China are the ones that come up all the time because they appear to be the ones that would have the highest technology when it comes to military.
They don't say enemy; they'll say adversary. The adversary is the soft enemy.
Yeah, we know what it all means. The same thing, right? If they had this technology, we wouldn't have a country anymore.
Right.
I mean,
yes. I saw an interview with Mitt Romney on some news show, and he was talking about it, and he was Senator Mitt Romney. He basically said, "We're pretty sure this is not Russian or Chinese."
I mean, Putin would, I might have said this in an earlier podcast, Chris, Putin would land one of those things on the White House lawn and give the White House a finger.
We would have seen something demonstrated in this recent Russian activity. And some of these reports have been around so long, like it's not them. It can't be. It can't be us either, because some of these reports from way back, we weren't capable of it either.
No, and some of these reports from way back, that technology would have made it to the mainstream in 50 years.
Right. We would have seen that technology demonstrated at some point. It doesn't hold up when you start to examine.
So I guess my point is, if, let's just say something is uncovered, something is actually engaged with by the military plane, jet, whatever you want to call it, I get a little nervous if the first instinct is to consider it an enemy.
Oh, definitely. If we, I mean, I don't know how to say this. If we don't assume that this thing outclasses us, we might be picking a fight with something that we cannot possibly fight.
Right. It'll be like me saying, "Hey, Mike Tyson,
right.
F you.
Right.
F you and your mother and then getting beat the hell out,
There have been some accounts that I have read of military planes that have gone down and people that have gone, missing as a result of interactions with some of these things. I mean, when somebody passes away, dies in service, they're not always told exactly what happened. Their family, rather, is not told exactly what happened, depending on, what was going on, So there's a very good chance that we have lost some people due to interaction with these objects, even inadvertently. They did even say in the hearings, what was it? How many near misses did they have?
There was a lot. I don't have the exact number.
It was like 11 or something like that. But they had reports of 11 near misses, and it wasn't that big of a time frame either. So It wasn't like it wasn't years and years. It was a relatively short time frame and 11 near misses. Are we sure that there hasn't been other instances of planes, coming into contact with these things and crashing, and planes crash? Sometimes we never find them, as it's happened.
Right.
Who's to say what? Who knows? Maybe not. But there's enough breadcrumbs out there that if they can get the right people in front of them and asking the questions, that would be great. But what are we going to do with that information? That's what I want to see. Like, what is going to happen?
We've talked about this before. I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast or not, but here's my thoughts on it. I think all this stuff is just eventually conditioning us to accept the next thing. Because why are we going through all this? For what? What's the end result? What's the objective? The objective is to learn more about these things, right? Or to disprove them. I don't know how bringing all these people in to talk openly is going to disprove anything. It's actually going to embolden your case. It's not going to disprove a damn thing by saying, hey, all military personnel or anyone that's ever worked for the military, anyone that's worked for the government, feel free to talk to us about it. There is a provision which we'll get to, an exception. But unless it's top secret, you can talk to us about it because we want to disprove this. It doesn't even make any sense.
Right. No, they are softened. I do think there's an element of that we're being softened up for the next revelation. I think you can't dump this on people. Not even that long ago, they were doing polls and things and just asking people just to see what the effect would be, and studies on what would the effect be of us learning that we're not alone. Like, how would that affect religions? How would it affect world economies? How it would have an effect, right? I mean, it's
especially if we had an understanding of them or whatever you want to say. I mean, but if we made any sort of contact and we're able to in some way communicate at all, and we learned anything, we're going to learn things that we don't know about. I mean, that's what I would be thinking. I don't think that whatever we communicate with is going to say, hey, you guys get Netflix too?
What if they don't communicate? What if, and it has been suggested that we are so beneath whatever these things are, that the reason why they don't interact with us, this is a question I hear some people say, well, if they're out there, why don't they land on the White House lawn and introduce themselves? And it's kind of like, our researchers don't land in the middle of the jungle and introduce themselves to the gaggle of primates that we're studying. We don't introduce ourselves. We just do what we do. And we try not to hurt them, but we're not particularly concerned if they're confused or not. Our researchers will frequently tranquilize and tag an animal and take it in, and for the good of the whatever we're trying to do, the good of the species or whatever we're trying to do. We don't explain ourselves. We don't, we just put it back and just, what does it think? It wakes up and goes, I don't know, guys, I was in a field eating grass, and all of a sudden, something knocked me out, and I was taken up in this craft, and they're all going, hey, you're nuts. We like to assume that whatever's coming we're on equal footing with it. What if we learn we're not? What if we learn that something is coming and going, doesn't give two shits about what we think about it, just gets around whatever defenses we have, and it doesn't even pay us any attention. Just it's here to do what it's here to do, and then it goes where it goes. We're a non-entity. What will that effect have? Like, what will that affect in our mindset? Like, could our psyches even handle that? Like, wait, it doesn't care about us? No, it doesn't. It really doesn't care about us. Like, we can't shoot it down. We can't stop it. There's nothing we could do that would affect it. So what effect would it have if we found out as a people that this, whatever this thing is, just didn't really care about us? Like, we weren't even a concern.
Oh, it'd knock us down a few pegs, that's for sure, right? I think that we said it earlier in this discussion, but generally speaking, as human beings, generally, we're pretty arrogant, right? And that arrogance, just like anyone else that's arrogant, usually comes back to bite you.
Yeah, and if there is something coming going and we have tried to shoot it down and it hasn't taken, retaliatory actions, maybe it's because whatever we did didn't really even phase it. I mean...
Well, I listen, if we find that out, that we have taken offensive actions against whatever that's being seen and nothing is done in retaliation, that's when I say, get worried.
Right.
Because it's just like it was a little kid punching a grown man, right? He's not going to punch the little kid back because it will be over in 2 seconds.
Right.
He's not going to do it.
But he's only going to ignore it for so long.
If you kick him in the balls, okay, maybe he'll slap the kid. I mean, I'm just saying, right? And then now all hell's broken loose, right?
So metaphorically, we are the kid kicking the aliens in the balls. Is what
saying. Kicking them in the balls might be if we did a nuclear attack on them or something like that. Because if they just had let's say a firefight with them with a plane, that's probably nothing. That's probably like a little kid just kicking you in the shins.
Although, if the stories of crashes are to believe, these things are not invulnerable because apparently they crash occasionally. Right.
But I think the crashes are something with themselves, not something they were shot down.
True.
If you believe all this stuff, but if there was a crash, I have not read or heard of any story reporting that it was because it was shot down. Have you?
No, but would we? Would we hear? I mean,
no. I mean,
there's a lot of cases of things crashing, which may or may not have been shot down. It happened a while ago with, I think the Russians shot down an airline. I can't remember what it exactly was. It might have even been Australia or something. There was a case where one country shot down an airline, killed a lot of people. I believe it was Russia. Yes. Russia shot down an airplane that was from the Australia, right?
Okay.
And they used all sorts of BS to say why it happened, but I don't know. Would we even find out about these things? I don't know. We have to start somewhere, so I guess the place you have to start is let's uncover if there's even something here.
Right.
But
there's one exception, I guess, to this provision that we were talking about everyone being able to come out and talk. And apparently there's an exception for any data that officials conclude, which what officials are concluding, how do they conclude it, I'm not sure. But if these officials conclude that the objects might be part of a top secret U.S. program, might be, is interesting. I mean, I know I like to play on words here, but I think it's interesting to look at them. It's important too. So if these objects that might be part of a top secret U.S. program that only a few are privy to, or events that likely relate to a special access program or compartmented access program, those things will stay hidden. And that's, when you first read it, you say, well, maybe
stay hidden from who, though? Stay hidden from everyone, or stay hidden from the public?
From the public. They can't testify. Like, they wouldn't be able to come and testify like we're talking about. So to me, it's vague enough that it makes me a little nervous.
Do they say it has to be
concerned is probably a better word than nervous.
Right, and they say it believed to be or suspected of being a part of a
that might be part of. So
that
what's
qualifier?
That?
Yeah, that's.
I don't like that.
That's leaving a very. Oh, this might be. Everything might be.
Everything might be. Well, maybe you have to actually show something. I don't know, and who the officials that conclude it either. It's not clear, at least what I was able to come up with. But it looks like, from what I was able to look at, Chris, that these classifications are for basically a lot of things that are they're called above top secret, which is pretty top secret, I guess. So, like you had said earlier, I don't think they can stop someone, if this passes, I don't think they can stop someone from talking about what they saw. Unless it has something to do with a U.S. program that only a few are privy to. The wording of this is just so ambiguous that it concerns me that this provision might be just basically kicking the teeth in on the other provision, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think they're giving them authorization to speak to anyone. I think that what they're doing is giving them authorization to report it through a very structured apparatus that they set up for that, which I think has, like, the heads of intelligence agencies. You know, they're not just going to, like, hand this information out.
I want them to.
I know. I do too. It's taking too long.
I think anything with the government takes a long time.
Well, and you got to do this right too, right? We can't rush this because it is kind of important. You know, we do have to make sure. What if? Let's just say what if. What if this is all a con? Like, I don't think it is. I don't know what the motivation would be. Like, that's a question I always ask. Like, if somebody says something like it's a conspiracy. Okay, my first two questions I ask are, what's the motivation behind said conspiracy? Like, because keeping a huge lie is a lot of work, you know? So it has to be
a lot of people.
Right, and the more people who you let in on something, the more chance that somebody's going to talk. But UFOs have always been the exception to that because a lot of people talk. But almost to a person, anyone who talked was generally discounted by anyone in the serious press.
Right.
So it was almost like the topic had its own built-in protection that you could never get to it because anyone who talked about it was discounted as being a nut job, conspiracy theorist or X-Files fan, whatever you want to call them.
Oh, what are you degrading me for?
I
love the X-Files.
Right, but how many UFO segments have you seen on TV where they stick that X-Files music over?
Do you notice they don't do that as much anymore?
Not as much, but that used to be their winky way of saying, this is all kind of kooky TV
We're going to report it, but...
Right. So, but let's just say this is all a...
But have you noticed that? I mean, I know I just said it, but when I'm watching different news reports now, they don't play that music anymore.
Some do, but not as much. It's the tide is changing. The tone of a lot of the articles and news reports is different. It's not jokey. It's not, hey, look at this freak show. It's, hey, this is going on. And sometimes the anchors kind of, uncomfortably kind of chat afterwards, like, oh, that'd be something, right? But you can almost see that they don't quite know what to do with it either because they've been trained from a very, early part of their career that this stuff is nonsense. And now they're suddenly being asked to take it seriously. And they're doing it, but it's an adjustment.
It's not really shifting gears, but I'm just going to say, to me, the most exciting thing that could ever come of this provision that we're talking about being able to speak, government officials or contractors or civilians that work for the government, military personnel, to me, the highlight of everything is being able to just listen to everything Lou Elizondo might say.
Yes, I mean, he's for those who don't know, Luis Elizondo is the one who ran the ATIP, the what was it? I don't have the
You're better at these acronyms.
I know. I usually have them written down. Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, I believe is what it was.
He was in intelligence for about 20 years.
Right. So he has a lot. He says he has a lot of information that he can't talk about because he's not cleared to talk about them. But if he's in front of Congress where he can talk about it, he will tell some tales that will make people's heads spin.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you this, Chris. If he testifies, we're both taking the day off.
Oh, yeah.
All right? And that's it.
If the next hearing, I'm going to make sure that that's going to be an event, and we're going to do an episode like immediately.
Maybe we'll do a live one.
Maybe that would be great. But Elizondo has a book coming out. Now, I don't know when it's coming out, but it's coming out soon. So supposedly in that book, I mean, everything he says in that book has to be cleared through the Pentagon, so they have to get clearance. So, but supposedly some things are going to come out in that book that are going to be interesting, and books have some weight to them because the media will report on things that a major publisher puts out, allegations or whatever. So
he's an interesting cat, man.
He is. He's stepped back a little bit. I have not seen a lot with him lately, but I think there's stuff going on behind the scenes that he's doing. But I think people are about to see a lot more of him. And the other thing that's going to happen soon is I believe CNN has a huge documentary about the subject that they were readying for this summer. I thought we'd see it in July, but maybe it's going to be August at this point. But I mean, that's coming on. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of who is it? There's an Australian reporter. His name is Ross Coulthard, and he's not a name that Americans tend to know, but basically he's like the Australian equivalent of Anderson Cooper, kind of that kind of like. He's known throughout the country. He's known to be respectable. He's known to do, he's a serious journalist that actually has uncovered stories, trafficking, huge stuff. But he dipped his toe into this stuff, thinking, "Hey, I want to check out this UFO stuff. It's probably a load of crap," and I'll quickly be able to say, "Hey, it's a load of crap," and move on. And then as he started dipping into it, it just got weirder and weirder. And now he's one of these people saying, "Hey, I didn't think I'd be one saying this, but there's something here." He's been saying that a lot of his journalist friends, big names, have been coming to him quietly behind the scenes and just saying, "I used to laugh at this stuff, but I'm starting to see what you're seeing." And he's been encouraging them and saying, "Yes, look into it, because if you start to peel this onion, you start to see that, the story we've been told, that there's quote unquote no evidence for all this stuff, really isn't true, that there's a mound of evidence, a lot of evidence in a lot of different places." So I think we're going to start to see some bigger name journalists getting involved and approaching this subject seriously. And again, we've seen in the last few years, we've seen more of this than.
And I think, Chris, when you talk about evidence, I think it's important for people to have an understanding of the difference between direct and circumstantial evidence. And I think that's one of the hang-ups with this whole topic, that everyone wants direct evidence, right? And there's two types of evidence, and they're both equally weighted. And here I go again, I'm an attorney, but in the court of law in this country, both are treated just as equally, right? So direct evidence is, I saw a UFO. That's direct evidence, right? Or however, whatever circumstance that happened that you were involved in, you saw it. But one of the ones that they use as an example when they talk to a jury, there's two of them they use. I'll use both of them maybe. But one is, all right, if you go outside and it's raining, you're standing in the rain, well, you can obviously come in and testify that it's raining, right? But if someone walks in and you're not outside and you can't see out the window and they're wet, well, that's circumstantial evidence that it's raining, right?
So they could have gotten wet from somebody could have dumped
from something else.
Somebody could have dumped a pail of water.
Or another one that a lot of judges use is if you watch the mailman put the mail in the mailbox, That's direct evidence you saw him put the mail in the mailbox, right? If you didn't see him or her put the mail in the mailbox, but you go out to the mailbox and there's mail in it, it's circumstantial evidence that the mailman put it there, right? And that evidence should be good enough for a jury. But for whatever reason, in this context with this subject, nobody wants to believe the circumstantial evidence. Nobody. Everyone, well, that could have been anything. Well, yeah, it could, but what else could it have been?
Right.
What else? Well, I don't know. Well, okay. If you don't know, then what are you saying?
Right. Yeah. So these these Navy pilots saw something. Well, they misunderstood what they saw. They mistook glare for an object. And yeah, at what point do we don't give the
right.
testimony? And then of course there's the next level of it is, okay, what if somebody produces a metal that we don't know how to replicate and says, here's this piece of metal that was taken from one of these things. It's pretty solid evidence.
You could have got that anywhere.
Right. Even if it's chemically, and there are people out
Chemists
there.
say, whatever, geologists, however, that's not from this planet.
Right. Or those are,
well, you know.
or those are a configuration of elements or whatnot that we don't do, or it doesn't happen naturally. Even that doesn't occur naturally. Okay, so then how to be manufactured? Okay, well, we don't know how to manufacture something like this because there is some stuff that, again, what do you believe? Because people say they have it, but nobody's rolled it out for everybody to take a look at yet. And I think it goes back to, I think a lot of this stuff has ended up with private aerospace because that's how you keep it out of the. That's how the Pentagon officials keep it away from the curious gazes of Congress. You know, like, how do we do it? Well, we shift it over here to this private company, and they can't get at it. So we can do a special program with them where we operate it, but all the information's kept outside the government in this company, and so it's protected. So
that's why this is interesting, this provision that we're talking about, because if it's actually utilized and it's not hindered by this exception we just talked about, it has the potential to be groundbreaking, and it has the potential to shift the paradigm, I guess, for this whole society. I know this is a huge thing I'm talking about, but I actually think if it happens the way we're talking about, that's what will happen.
How can it not?
Right.
I mean, that's the question: is how can it not change everything about everything we think is true? Again, just sticking to the thought process that it's a physical object coming from a physical place on this physical plane from another part, galaxy, whatnot. That alone blows our minds. If there's anything weirder to it, who the hell? All right, I don't know what to do with this information, but there are people in.
Yeah, I look at it this way, Chris. It's very hot here right now, right? So we were in the pool earlier, right? So I'll use that as a metaphor. Once you get in the pool, you're wet, right? It doesn't matter how deep you go. You're just not going to get any more wet. That's how I'm viewing this. Once the public accepts, if they accept, I know we just talked about it a little earlier, but if they accept that it's craft, right? The next step is easy. The next step is not going to be as difficult because we're already wet. We're already there.
Right. No, I agree 100%. It's, but you have people talking about things that even I have a hard time with, like words being bandied about, like time travelers. And like, I'm not talking about I want to say conspiracy theorists, but like, I'm not talking about hobbyists saying these things. I'm talking about people who are in contact with people in the government who are speaking off the record. Ross Coulthart, it comes to mind because he talks to a lot of government officials and he says, well, I can't get them on the record because they can't talk about this stuff. But they're throwing around things like time travel, alternate dimensions, connections with consciousness. I mean, there's a whole part of this UFO topic that leaves the nuts and bolts and machinery and craft and flying through space and moves over to, what is consciousness? What is this whole thing that we're in? What is it all about? Maybe the whole thing that we think it is completely wrong, and the purpose for our even being here is connected in this. Again, it sounds nuts.
This sounds like a whole nother line of podcasts. I love it.
And when you start to go down that road, you start to, all right, it's sounding a little crazy. It's sounding a little new agey. But that's invariably where it goes. It never stays in the nuts and bolts. So I think the interesting part is all this stuff we're talking about, the UFO office, new UFO office, the provision of the National Defense Act, it's all built around that presupposition that this is all nuts and bolts, something that we can figure out. That if we just get enough data, we're going to be able to parse this and figure it out.
Maybe.
And then there's other people who are saying that we are nowhere near the point where we could get this whole thing in our heads.
Maybe it's not as crazy as you think, Chris, because the name of this organization is called All Domain. I mean, maybe it's right under our nose.
Right, so they're saying all domain, even not just all domain of water, air, space. They're saying all domain of...
I mean, it's kind of instead of all terrain, or whatever you want to call it, right? All domain. It's kind of an anomaly.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting name, Resolution Office. What is a resolution? What's the resolution? Listen.
They try to make it sound scientific. You have to put those words in it.
Resolution.
It's...
Here I go. I know. I'm an attorney looking at the words, but
words matter.
All domain. That's
But don't you think it's also kind of vague?
Oh, it's very vague.
So it's
is that even? Can you say very vague? But it's vague.
It's vague enough that it can include just about anything.
Pardon my language, but all domain. I mean, what is that? Right?
Well, I guess
have you ever heard anyone say that before in terms of airspace and sea, all domain? I've never heard anyone talk about it like that before.
Actually, I think that's I've heard that I've heard that term
anomaly.
Used
all
with military anomaly. In the military context of all domains. Yeah, because it's the domain of the air and the sea. It's kind of like the different battlegrounds. I think it is interesting that they're lumping it. It's such a scientific name, such a boring name, as was that original department that the Pentagon had set up. That what was it? Air threat, the AIMSOG or whatever. Like that.
That was Airborne Object Identification and Management Group.
Right. I mean, that's pretty boring and corporate kind of wording. I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating ride the next few months because, like I said, the word out there is that when the January 6th hearings are over, they're going to start turning their eye to some of this stuff. And
can't wait.
I want to see who they get up on that stand. And the other part of this Authorization Act, too, is just like the last one, it mandates reports. It mandates I think another 180 days. I believe it says not later than 180 days after the date on which the Comptroller General completes the compilation and itemization required by subsection A2 shall submit to Congress a report summarizing the historical record. Okay, so they said no later than 180 days after the date that the Comptroller General completes the compilation. So how long do they have to complete the compilation? Because it seems to imply that they're going to have a certain amount of time to get their shit together. And then after that, they have to submit another report to Congress about what they've found.
All right,
Not necessarily a public report, though. That needs to be said. Because remember that last UFO report that came out there was a public version and then there was a classified version that differed somewhat, size and,
Yep.
and amount of information.
I looked it up, Chris. Military domains. Air, land, maritime, and space. So there you go. All right.
Yeah.
So
it's
not a conspiracy.
It's common military parlance.
All right, I'm sorry.
But it does raise eyebrows just because, again, it's there's a lot of people who don't even know that undersea unidentified objects is a thing. Like, there are stories that I have seen recounted in some of the literature about, a Navy sub messing around with torpedoes, and they have to, they fire it out and then they fetch it and get it from, bring it up, and that at one of these events, some object came up from under the sea. They couldn't tell what it was, but it was big, and sucked the torpedo down into the depths and disappeared, and they never found it or the torpedo again. And they came out of it being like, what the hell was that? There's nothing that we have that could do that, nothing our adversaries have that can do that. There's a lot more evidence of undersea weirdness, as much or more than there is of air weirdness.
Well, wasn't that part of the whole thing with the Tic Tac? Whatever you want to call it, unidentified UFO or whatever you want to call it, UAP. They followed it, and then it was hovering over something that they were questioning because there was waves breaking, and they were kind of far out in the ocean. And then both of those pilots said it was a craft in the water that the smaller one was hovering over.
Right, and it seemed like the smaller one came from high up in the atmosphere
To come down to it.
zip right down to the thing, as if it was coming to liaison with
Right.
something under. There's a lot. So the fact that they're getting all this in one place now, we don't care if it's in the air. We don't care if it's in space. We don't care if it's underwater. We want to know about it. That's casting a very wide net. So even if you take out those provisions of, might be a top secret program that can't be talked about. Even if you take that out, you're still going to get a lot of info. Like we said, the question is, what are they going to do with it? What happens next? Like, let's say people come forward and say, I saw, A, B, C, D, E. This is what happened. So is the next step, okay, you say this happened. Now we go looking for the documentation to show. At what point do some of these things just end up in dead ends? Because, you have a service person who says, I saw this thing, but I don't know. I guess you can.
I don't think it can ever be a dead end if these are public hearings.
Yeah, I suppose not.
I just don't. If the people sound credible, which I think they probably will, if they appear to be credible, I don't know if this could ever just go away, because it's mind blowing.
I don't see how it could either. I think it's just the part of me that has been here before, maybe not to this degree, but I feel like over the years of following this topic, there have been a lot of instances of, this is it. This is gonna blow this thing wide open, baby. This is coming. And then it just sort of goes away and nothing happens. But I don't think we've never been here before.
No,
I
no
mean,
one's
never
ever testified in front of Congress. Let's just say that happens.
Right.
And somebody that has verifiably impressive credentials to sit there and answer questions to that extent, I just think that it's going to just shift the way we're looking at things.
Yeah, I do too. Whatever happens, it's going to be a wild ride, and we're going to be talking about this stuff for some time, because I don't think the topic's going away. But I think that's probably good enough for this episode. I think.
I agree. I agree.
Covered enough ground.
Hopefully, everybody found this interesting.
Yes, hopefully you did find this interesting, or at least thought-provoking. Did you find it? Did we say something that makes you go, "Hey, I want to look into this a little bit more"? I highly suggest it, but there's tons to talk about on this, and we'll certainly be back to talk about more. But in the meantime, what would really help us is if you gave us a positive rating on your podcast app of choice. That'd be good, wouldn't it, Steve?
I would really like that. You would too, and it would help us move forward. And if you had a review you could write, that would be even more helpful.
Yes.
Helpful for us.
We'd love that. And sharing this show with friends, family, anyone you think is into this topic, especially if they're not deep in this topic, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to come at it from, you don't need to know much about it to hopefully follow along with what, we're trying to bring people up to speed. I know sometimes we can kind of go down, the little rabbit holes, but hopefully those forays into the rabbit holes are brief and we come back and give you the overall. So anyone you know who might be interested in hearing a little bit more about this, share it with them, because that's how you help the show.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all listening. And I think that's where we'll wrap it up for now. So until next time, I'm Chris.
And I'm Steve.
And we've been talking about some deep shit.
Yeah!